Good morning. My name is Rabbi Chaim Beliak, and it's my privilege to welcome you to a very important program in our series called Freighted Legacies. This morning, we're welcoming you to a program that is entitled uh, uh, Poland, a Green Land, a provocative reflection on Aharon Appelfeld's novel. We have with us today a very important person who will be leading us through the novel, Dr. CAROLA KAPLAN. I'll be introducing her in a few moments, and you can see her on the screen. And CAROLA is a longtime friend and associate. But first, I want to introduce you to the program known as Freighted Legacies. This is a series that has allowed us to bridge the gap between Polish and Jewish culture, um, uh, often tackling topics and issues dealing with historical issues, with literary issues, with the many what we would call remainder issues in understanding Jewish and Polish uh, uh, legacy. One of the things that I want to do this morning is to make sure you understand what we're doing. So I call your attention to the bottom of the screen where we have a series of symbols, and I'm going to ask you to look at the word interpretation, and you should pick the language that you're most comfortable in, because this webinar is being broadcast, I should say interpreted, in both English and in Polish. So while you may want to choose the language you best understand, the language will also be interpreted in Polish, so that our viewers in Poland will be able to hear Carola, who does not speak Polish, speak in Polish, which is a rather wonderful feat of Zoom technology. Let me just take a moment. We had expected our chairperson of Beit Polska to be with us today, and I'm going to just share with you a little bit of what's going on in Poland today. I just returned from a 13-day trip to Poland, and was very pleased to see a number of colleagues in Poland. And as many parts of the Jewish world is aware, there's been a tremendous response to the um, uh, I'm going to need to share screen. Um, uh, uh, there's been a tremendous response to the of issues that happened with the attack on October 7th, and the Beit Polska progressive Jewish community has been involved in responding to that. And perhaps later on today, I'll be able to share with you a series of pictures from the activities of the community that has been involved in responding publicly and expressing support and concern for what's going on in the Middle East. Let me turn now to introducing Carola KAPLAN, and share with you that, as I said, Carola KAPLAN is a longtime friend. She, for many years, lived in Claremont, California, and taught at California State University, Pomona, where she specialized in literature that is near and dear to people who love good literature. She was the president of the Joseph Conrad Society and has visited Poland for conferences and discussions about the work of Joseph Conrad. Um, and at a certain point in her life, Dr. Kaplan branched out and became a member of the Institute of Contemporary Psychoanalysis and was a practicing psychoanalyst until very recently, and has published not only in her original academic field of literature, in various fields on not only Joseph Conrad, but E.M. Foster, T.E. Lawrence, and Christopher Isherwood. But also she has written extensively in her new field of psychoanalysis. So we're very privileged that she will be taking us into the novel that was written in 2005 by Aharon Appelfeld, and has just appeared in the year 2023 in English. Originally, the novel was in Hebrew, and this is a novel of great interest because of the subject matter, the subtlety, and many other things that I'm sure Carola will point to. We're very privileged that she's with us today as she enlightens us about the novel Poland, A Green Land. Carola, thank you for being with us. We're very privileged to welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction, Chaim. I appreciate it. So what I'll be presenting today is it's halfway between a talk and a paper. It's en route to becoming a paper, which I'm calling Perilous Pilgrimage, Reclaiming Dissociated Parts of the Self in Aharon Appelfeld's Poland, A Green Land. The writer Aharon Appelfeld was a child survivor of the Holocaust. It is therefore not surprising that the Holocaust became the dominant subject of the more than 40 books that Appelfeld went on to write. But it is perhaps surprising that the form in which he chose to present these experiences was not the memoir, but the novel. Nor do these novels tackle this difficult subject head on. Rather, his treatment is indirect and oblique, elusive, rather than straightforward. As Appelfeld explains, quote, all my works are indeed chapters from my most personal experience, but nevertheless, they are not the story of my life. He elaborates, to write things as they already happened means to enslave oneself to memory. To my mind, to create means to order, sort out, and choose the words and the place that fit the work. The materials are indeed materials from one's life, but ultimately the creation is an independent concern. Further, he insists, reality is always stronger than the human imagination. The reality of the Holocaust surpassed any imagination. If I remained true to the facts, no one would believe me. And indeed, the very facts of Appelfeld's own life exceed imagination and strain credulity. His early childhood was peaceful enough. He was born into a highly assimilated Jewish, German-speaking family in what was then Romania and later became part of Ukraine. But the tranquility of Appelfeld's early life vanished at the age of 8 when the Nazis entered his village. They killed his mother and grandmother and seized him and his father, transporting them to separate concentration camps. Appelfeld managed to escape, and survive on his own in the forest, 8 years old. He fell in with a gang of Ukrainian criminals for whom he did odd jobs. After that, he found shelter for 5 months with a village prostitute. And when the Soviet army arrived, he worked for them as a cook, then ended up in a displaced persons camp in Italy before immigrating to pre-state Israel in 1946 at the age of 13. Only then did he become fully literate, learning Hebrew by copying out parts of the Bible, starting with Genesis and moving from chapter to chapter, book by book. Living in Jerusalem, he found he felt most at home in cafes where he learned to write and where he continued to write for the rest of his life. Initially, Appelfeld felt alienated from Israeli society, and he encountered considerable initial resistance from Israeli editors to the subject matter of his stories, the Holocaust and its aftermath. As he explained in an interview with the writer Philip Roth, "It was demanded of me to be the new Jew. Why should I be a new Jew? I love the old Jews." Appelfeld also resisted tying his stories to the particulars of history or embellishing them with extensive detail and explanation. The resulting fiction is bare of detail, spare, and suggestive rather than explicit. His subject matter and style owe more to Franz Kafka than to Charles Dickens. In Appelfeld's words, "I write a very factual prose. There are no poetics or adjectives. I do this so our imagination works harder." As Philip Roth has described Appelfeld's work, he writes out of a, quote, consciousness pitched somewhere between amnesia and memory. He writes a fiction midway between parable and history. Such is the spare and suggestive narrative of the novel we are considering today, Poland, a Green Land. In it, the protagonist, Yaakov Fein, an assimilated Jew who is estranged from his family of origin and cut off from his history, with the family having come from Poland, returns to the Poland from which his parents immigrated to learn about the land, about his ancestors, and thereby ultimately to learn about himself. Soon, what began as an external journey, a kind of personal travelogue, becomes an inner voyage of self-discovery and an account of his psychological development and transformation. In the course of his sojourn, Yaakov learns about many aspects of himself of which he was previously unaware. As the novel notes, quote, "Truth be told, Yaakov never much cultivated his inner world. What little world he had went into practical, everyday matters." One way the novel registers changes within Yaakov is in his evolving responses to Poland. Initially, he is taken with the quiet, the slow pace, and the civility of life in the old city of Krakow. Then he feels entranced by the beauty of the Polish countryside. As he expresses it, "I thirst for the color green." He takes long walks, drinking in details of the bucolic scene, marveling at the continuum of miracles. But the lush and verdant land can sometimes make people forget what should be remembered or memorialized. Although Yaakov's parents carefully covered the grave of Sabina, their neighbor's child, who had hidden with them in the forest, they hoped to return to it and retrieve her bones for a proper burial. But when they returned to her grave, the field had been plowed for planting. Similarly, when Yaakov meets a man who has gone to pray at his ancestors' graves, this man tells him that he couldn't find a trace. Everything was plowed over. Everything was green, as if the place had always been that way. Of course, for the graves to have vanished, they had to have been desecrated, plowed over. Indeed, Yaakov is outraged to find that his own family's graves had been desecrated, the headstones broken, and used to pave the town square. Thus, Yaakov learns that Poland's fast-growing green carpet can be made to cover over iniquity and to consign horrific events to oblivion. Perhaps the greatest achievement of the novel is that in it, Appelfeld finds the narrative means to lead Yaakov convincingly from his initial sparse knowledge of himself to a much more complete and profound understanding of where he comes from and who he is. Initially, Yaakov is so cut off from himself that he often misspeaks, blurts things out, makes statements that are surprising or startling, even to himself. He says many things he does not plan to, as if he is a ventriloquist for an unknown being who lives within him. As these words reveal to him, not only reveal him not only to others, but to himself, he becomes increasingly more self-reflective. In conversation after conversation, Yaakov reveals a part of himself of which he had been unaware, a part that feels connected to Poland, that wants to know about the lives and the fate of his ancestors. For this reason, he argues with his wife Rivka in Israel, who, not seeing the logic of his going to Poland, asks him, "What will you find there?" To which he replies, "Everything." And the narrative comments, he could not resist using that word. Considering the logical, practical life Yaakov has led up to that point, this answer seems not to make sense. In a similarly nonsensical encounter, once Yaakov is in Poland, he argues with a Jewish man from a neighboring village who says that Yaakov is traveling to a place where there is nothing. Yaakov argues to the contrary, "I'm going to a place that's full of life." But since these words come from a hidden or as yet undisclosed part of himself, Yaakov is, quote, not grasping the meaning of what he was saying. In yet another such instance, Yaakov argues in words and emotions not his own, with another Jewish man who maintains that there's nothing in Sdavtsa, the little village. In contradiction, Yaakov insists that Sdavtsa is significant because generations of Jews lived there, but they disappeared. They were eradicated. In these episodes, it is as if Yaakov is channeling the perspective of his parents. From the first, there is a sense of fatedness or inevitability about Yaakov's journey to Poland. Here's a quote from the book. "It seemed as though a wide, swollen river had borne him on its current for many days, and now cast him onto this green shore. Like a figure in a parable, Yaakov seems destined to follow his unique narrative. Even the name of the village he enters seems to be symbolic. Literally, Sadovtsa means Jewtown, an incongruous name for a village that even at its most populous had only 9 Jewish families, less than 40 of its inhabitants. While Yaakov's trip to Poland seems impulsive and frivolous to his wife, his daughters, and their acquaintances, to him it is vital because, as he puts it, sometimes one must succumb to the madness of the heart. Lonely and dissatisfied in his marriage, he has recently been bedeviled by nightmares in which his late mother visits him and recounts the horrors that she and his father endured during the war, of which she never spoke while she was alive. These distressing dreams made him feel that his life was splitting in two. The life of sleep had become more important to him than his waking life of family and shop. Clearly, then, his trip to Poland is prompted by a midlife crisis. As with that other most famous midlife crisis that prompts a spiritual journey, that of Dante in the Divine Comedy, Yaakov requires a reliable guide to accompany him on his quest. He finds this guide in Magda, whose home he happens to be dropped at when he is searching for lodging. Well, part of the fatedness in the novel. Magda will become the most important person in his life among those he comes to know in Poland. Mother, lover, confidant, advisor, soulmate, spiritual sister, she is, quote, the woman he had dreamed of all these years. A highly idealized composite figure, she becomes all women to him. His relationship with her is compensatory for all the unsatisfactory and insufficient relationships he has had with women, particularly with his wife and his mother. The text makes this comparison explicit. Quote, some of her gestures reminded him of his mother, but unlike his mother, she was nimble and smiling and filled with vitality and enthusiasm. As in all good myths or folk tales, she turns out to be the one person he is fated to get to know while he is in Sadovtsa. Magda knows his family in Poland very well because when she was a child, she worked for his grandparents in their home and in their shop. They treated her with such generosity and kindness that she became closer to them than to her parents. She is therefore the perfect person to acquaint Yaakov with his family in Poland. Through her fond recollections of them, Yaakov gets the opportunity to know them at their best. Magda also acquaints him with his enlightened great-grandfather, Itche Meir, a spiritual exemplar whose wisdom had been sought out by both Jews and Gentiles. Thereafter, Itche Meir becomes an ancestor about whom Yaakov feels great pride and also acts as a touchstone for discerning the spiritual state of others. Perhaps most importantly, Magda describes to him his parents as they were when she first met them, a vibrant, young, married couple, unburdened by the troubles that would later beset them. She even further humanizes his mother by telling him about her unsuccessful love affair with a young man before she met his father. Through all these descriptions and anecdotes, Magda recreates for Yaakov the pre-lapsarian Poland of the pre-war years. As a result, Yaakov's few days in Sadovtsa derailed him from his life. When Magda tells him that she loved his parents, he realizes, I still need to learn to love them. Her love and admiration for his family lead the way for him. Quote, Yaakov suddenly knew that if any living shred remained of his family, it was hidden in the body of this woman. Through her guidance and love, Magda thus expands Yaakov's life and shows him new possibilities. Magda also directs him to the 3 other people in the village who will most fully expand Yaakov's understanding of his family's history in Poland: Wanda, Nikolai, and Gregor. Wanda, who is almost a centenarian, is the, quote, village memory bank. She has had a warm relationship with members of Yaakov's family, having admired Yaakov's great-grandfather Itche, a God-fearing man to whom Jews and non-Jews went for advice. She had asked for his blessing. She attended Yaakov's parents' wedding and embroidered a tablecloth for them. Wanda has also been witness to the village's most terrible events. She tells Yaakov how all the Jews in the village were killed. The women, children, and old people were locked in the synagogue, which was then set on fire. All the able-bodied men were marched into the forest, where they were shot after digging their own graves. Although she acknowledges that, this is her statements, the village without Jews was barren, she observes that Jews arouse the darkness in people, and therefore the Jews are in perpetual danger. Yaakov then visits Nikolai, the man who hid his parents in different hiding places during the war, albeit grudgingly and greedily. Nikolai is mean, bitter, and profoundly anti-Semitic, and yet Yaakov is aware that Nikolai risked his life to help his parents survive when more apparently agreeable neighbors did nothing to help them. In acknowledgement of what Nikolai did do, Yaakov expresses appreciation by giving him the additional money he asks for. Finally, he visits Gregor, his first cousin, son of his uncle, his father's brother, who converted to Christianity and married a Gentile woman, but was nevertheless killed as a Jew in one of the concentration camps. Despite Yaakov's friendly overtures, Gregor strenuously denies his Jewish heritage and the family relationship he shares with Yaakov. Although Yaakov is disappointed at this cold reception, he makes repeated overtures of friendship to Gregor and invites him to visit him in Israel. In his open and receptive interactions with these villagers, as well as in the growing intimacy of his relationship with Magda, the reader sees the ways in which Yaakov has grown in empathy, self-awareness, and ability to love. In turn, Yaakov's emotional development is reflected in a series of vivid and revealing dreams. His dreams are an extension of his waking life and derive from his relationship with Magda. And I just might make a note here that when we dream and have our dreams are usually too complicated for anybody except ourselves to understand them, but a literary dream is made understandable for the reader. And that's the case in this book. Unlike the split between his waking life and his dream life that he experienced in Israel, in Poland, the two come together. This connection thus shows the integration of the practical and the creative in his life. Excuse me. In the first dream, he encounters a pretty girl he met at a kibbutz who had spurned him in the past. But in the dream, she encourages him, counsels him that, quote, a person must return to his ancestors with humility and learn to adapt his heart to theirs. She assures him, you're already on the way, and kisses him. At the end of the dream, the kibbutz girl turns into Magda. This dream reflects Magda's kind and generous treatment of him, as well as her growing love for him. In a following, similarly encouraging dream, Yaakov returns to Tel Aviv, where the women who are customers in his clothing store give him a warm welcome. In it, one woman in particular expresses gratitude for his having chosen an especially becoming dress for her, and she gives him flowers to thank him. This dream, too, seems to reflect Yaakov's heightened self-esteem that derives from Magda's love for members of his family with whom she connects him, as well as her loving care of him. Yet, as is true in any real love relationship, not all of Magda's observations are positive or encouraging ones. It is she who tells him that the townspeople had smashed the tombstones in the Jewish cemetery. When he sees those very tombstones used as pavers in the town square, he resolves to bring the tombstones to Tel Aviv, and these are his words, as a memorial and a tribute to the Jews of Zadovska. But then Yaakov has a dream in which he is once more a captain in the Israeli army. In the dream, he brings Israeli soldiers to the village to rescue the tombstones and bring them back to Tel Aviv, which he calls in the dream a holy mission. But when he looks at the boyish faces of the Israeli soldiers whom he has dragged, quote, so far from their homes to this hostile foreign land, he feels protective of them. He will not enlist these vulnerable young men, or, to interpret it psychoanalytically, the most vulnerable parts of himself, to undertake this dangerous and costly campaign. As this dream indicates, he decides not to make great effort or expend a lot of money to bring the stones back to Israel. He realizes that the stones are not holy. It was the lives they commemorate, as are all human lives, that were holy. Shortly after this incident, Yaakov is accosted by an elderly villager who tells him that since the villagers burned the Jews alive in the synagogue, there has been a curse on the village. He also tells Yaakov, you are rooted in this place, even though you were not born here. In response, Yaakov, quote, for the first time grasped that another life, different from the one he knew, was nesting within him. This thought shows an integration of his previous self with this newly discovered part of himself. In another dream, Yaakov attempts to resolve his still unsettled relationship with his cousin Gregor. In the dream, he rescues Gregor from his constricting and secretive life in Poland by taking him to Israel. In the dream, Gregor has a free and authentic life in Israel as the Jewish man he is. Yaakov takes pride in, quote, bringing a long-lost cousin home with him. When Grigor asks him, what is a Jew? Yaakov's answer is warm and personal. Me and you. Although Yaakov is not successful in getting Gregor to acknowledge his Jewish identity and their relationship as cousins, he does not give up on establishing a connection with him. In yet another dream, Dr. Laufer, the town's Jewish doctor who was killed with the other Jews in the village pogrom, returns to tell Yaakov that all the murdered Jews are living happily ever after, happily together in the afterlife. He reassures Yaakov that their lives were not lost, but rather, we now live in much better conditions. This dream softens the horror and despair Yaakov felt when he learned of the terrible fate of the Jews in the village. Several of Yaakov's dreams deal explicitly with the ways in which he has changed. In one dream, he reassures his daughter Anat that his sojourn in Poland was necessary because, quote, I lived in a state of self-deception for many years. And he promises her that he will return a changed man. In another dream, Yaakov reconsiders an earlier event in his life in which, after his parents died, he had crude, moving men dispose of all their possessions. In the dream, he regrets allowing these rough men to handle his parents' possessions so carelessly. Recalling that decision, he feels remorse at his callousness and failure to keep any of their things as remembrances. As these dreams reveal, by the end of his stay in Poland, Yaakov has managed to integrate his Polish and Israeli identities. As the narrative states, quote, Yaakov knew that his old life was over, that his future life would be different. How different, he could not imagine. The novel concludes with an enigmatic vignette worthy of Appelfeld's artistic predecessor, Franz Kafka. On an airplane, returning him home to Israel, Yaakov meets a man who is uncannily like him, his double, in fact. His double is also returning to Israel, also has a textile store, and also has a daughter like Yaakov's who is ill and in the hospital. His double tells Yaakov that he keeps himself from despair by trying to make himself useful around the hospital. He also tells Yaakov that he has decided not to isolate himself, but rather to be with people. What is the reader to make of this vignette as the ending of the book? Perhaps we, and I don't know if this is an open question, perhaps we should begin looking for an answer by observing the effect of his double on Yaakov. After he speaks with his double, Yaakov also feels less isolated. And here's a quote from the book. Everyone whom he had met since his journey to Poland suddenly seemed like relatives who had been lost throughout his life and had now been returned to him. It seems that Yaakov's encounter with his double has helped him to accept an important part of his identity, that of a Jew in Poland. And beyond that, his commonality with all other members of the human community. At the end, Yaakov's own solitary observation about life seems to merge with that of his newfound friend and fellow sufferer. Yaakov thinks to himself, quote, only someone who goes back to his ancestors' village is permitted to ask their forgiveness, no sooner does he have this thought than he realizes that it is not his idea, but that of his double. Thank you.
Carola, thank you very much. This is a wonderful novel that you've presented to us, and you've opened it up for us in a way that is very powerful. At this time, I'd like to invite people who've been listening to you and perhaps have read the novel, and also those who have not read the novel, to use the chat or the Q&A if they have questions. We already have a response from one person with a big exclamation of thank you. And you can see that in the chat, I'm sure. I want to ask, since I've been talking with you about this novel, a question as people begin to. Are you satisfied with the ending?
No, I am not. I'm rather puzzled by it. And what I said about it, I think, is very little. It's all I could make of it. The only way I can sort of see this is that Yaakov is engaged in his spiritual journey. And this man he meets seems a little more advanced on that journey. He, rather than being preoccupied with himself and his worries, he's helping other people. He reaches out to other people. He makes himself useful. And I think that we have not yet seen that in Yaakov. So maybe that's his next stage. That's all I can make of it. I'd be very interested in other people's ideas, actually.
Well, I'm going to take questions from other people, and you and I have had a chance to chat a little bit about. We have a response from Andrea White, which is Bravo, a series of encounters. Yes, I'm wondering about the one with the young woman in the cafe. This is towards the beginning of the novel, who reminds him of his aunt.
Yeah.
If you'd like to reflect on that.
Are you asking me, Chaim?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I sort of see the Aunt Bronca was a very beautiful woman and a great hope of her family. And then she becomes very involved in politics, in sort of utopian politics, and she leaves and the family and then disappears. And I think she is sort of emblematic of the hope and beauty of their earlier lives in Poland, all the things they hoped for, and they lose her, and they lose those things as well. But I think in being in Poland, Yaakov is hopeful somehow of finding those things, finding those beautiful things. And therefore he mistakes this beautiful woman for his aunt. And of course, she couldn't be his aunt because she's much younger than her aunt would be. At this stage, his aunt would be an old woman. So that's how I understand her.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Wondering if there are other responses from either people who've read the novel or people who've listened to your paper. I was sort of struck by this other reference that I don't think this is from Dominica. Comment and question from Jack Schlachter. This is Rabbi Jack Schlachter. Yasher Koach. He writes, did Appelfeld travel to Poland following his move to Israel? Many thanks for the enlightening talk.
You're very welcome. I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Chaim? Did
Um,
travel
I,
back to
I actually don't know the answer either. I actually went on a kind of search to see if he had meetings or some conferences or something in Poland, and I didn't find anything. And
Mhm.
uh, Rabbi Schlachter was the rabbi for the high holidays this last fall, so I suspect that his question comes in part from having had this recent encounter himself in Poland, and
Mhm.
um, it's an interesting um, uh, question because
Yes.
his actual experiences in Europe as a formative experiences are in Romania in a different landscape, a different context entirely. So evoking Poland is
Yeah, I understand.
quite
Mhm.
different.
Mhm.
Um, what it I was going to ask you about this uh, incident where he gets into a fight in the bar. Um,
Jacob's Appelfeld's passport. Do they have it?
Oh, I,
there's
this
an
question,
advisor, Bruce Kaplan, off camera, is offering what's the advice?
the question,
Do they have his passport?
do
You
they,
can
yeah, do they have, that's a good question. Do they have Appelfeld's passport? Because his passport would show whether he'd ever been to Poland.
Oh, a detective story. Was Appelfeld in Poland?
That's who I am.
Okay.
There's a
Um,
question here from Leah Lai.
we have another question. Dominica, why don't you chime in here with that question from Leah?
Mm.
Sure. So we had Leah Light writing, Jakob's visit to Poland affords an opportunity for Poles to think anew about Jews and Poland's past and present perception of Jews. But there doesn't seem to be much of this in the novel. Do you have any thoughts about whether Jacob is absorbing this and what it means for him as an Israeli?
I think I agree with Yulia that that doesn't seem to be discussed in the novel. Yaakov's reflections on what he hears from the villagers. That doesn't seem, we don't get his further thoughts about those. So, but I think it's a very interesting question. And how does, and how do the things people say to him change his thinking? There was a question from Andrea. I don't see the question. It appeared and then disappeared.
Yes, there is also a comment from Andrea. It's
Yeah.
disturbing that Appelfeld depicts such continuing anti-Semitism, but it's complicated. Our lives are not the same without the Jews, but also the Jews bring out the darkest part of us.
Yes. Yes, it's
And
very
there is
complicated.
also a thank you note from Judith Raffaeli. Thank you so very much, Carola. I so enjoyed your presentation. I will definitely read the book.
Thank you very much. Yeah, even the praise that some of the townspeople or villagers have for Jews seem very ambivalent. One villager says Jews are so extremely clever, so very clever. They're more cunning than the devil. So the mixed feelings are just contained in that statement.
I noticed also the question by Richard Hecht, which is, this is kind of a inside baseball question, but I think we can ask it. Richard Hecht asks, do you think there is a genre in modern Hebrew, perhaps in minor genre of Jews who go back to Europe, like in Agnon? And how does that fit with the kind of dynamic that Sidra de Koven has described. I don't know if
Well, I don't think I don't have the expertise to answer this question, but Richard, perhaps you have some thoughts you could share with us.
let's see if this works. I'm going to see if the answer live, if that works. Richard, can you chime in? I don't know if that works. I've never tried that before.
I will try to let him in.
Yeah.
We've never done this before.
Can you hear me?
Good, Charles.
Richard, you're
Yes.
on.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I thought it was an honest question. I wasn't, hiding
Oh,
anything.
No, it sounds like a very good question. I just don't know, and I don't know enough to answer. I thought
Oh.
maybe you know these writers.
Okay, so since you're a
Mhm.
Conrad expert,
Yes.
and I want to ask you a question
Okay.
about Conrad for a moment, and then
Mhm.
I'll come back to an issue you mentioned with regards to how the non-Jews think of the Jews in the village. So you remember the beginning of Heart of Darkness.
Mhm.
Marlowe is on the Nelly,
Mhm.
and they're sort of it's at sundown, and Conrad has this beautiful description of how, as they look down the Thames, the city and the river sort of disappear into one another. And my question, I just ask it because you're a Conrad expert, whether you think that Conrad is kind of doing an literary narrative on the beginning of Moby Dick and Loomings, the first chapter of Melville's novel. I don't know. I just thought I wanted to ask you. I've been dying to ask you that question all day. So,
Oh, okay. Well, I have to look again at the beginning of Melville's novel. Conrad purported to dislike Melville.
foolish.
Yeah, he whether he really did or not. Sometimes writers purport to dislike writers whose work they actually admire and perhaps even envy. But I think he had some of the sense that, well, Melville wasn't a sailor the way Conrad actually had actually worked, gone to sea, so that somehow he was a bit of a pretender, I think. That's how I interpret Conrad's response. So I haven't answered your question, but I just gave you a little bit about Conrad's, what he has said about Melville.
Okay. Let me come back to Poland, a green land, and the comment you made about how Appelfeld portrays the Jews of this village. Not the Jews, the non-Jews, and how they say these embarrassing things about the Jews. And when I was reading the novel, I thought, lying behind this return to Europe is, of course, the film Shoah. And the very beginning of Shoah, it's actually more than an hour in length, where, we get the guy going back and forth to Treblinka in the train. And then we told the story of the kid who was saved from the Nazis because he had a beautiful voice. And then all of a sudden, Lanzmann brings that kid and now as a fully grown man, into the village where all the villagers are praising him, but it's kind of negative. It's all of their negative things about Jews coming forth as they see this one survivor. So I thought that there's a kind of, I love intertextual connections, especially with great writers and filmmakers. And so I wondered, what about intertextual relations between this novel and something like Shoah?
Well, I think possibly. I mean, writers read other writers assiduously, and a writer also, in my mind, knows who the rival is or the rivals, those who really do it well. Those are the ones they're trying to be better than. So, yeah, I think there's tremendous intertextuality in all writers. Writers are, of course, great readers, and yeah.
I'm going to give this new technology that we discovered one more opportunity. I see a question that came in from Terry Winant. I'm going to read the question and let Terry. Well, no, Terry, read your own question. Go ahead. I lost her question for some reason. It was a question that asked about the view of anti-Semitism. Oh, there she is. Okay. Terry, Dominica, can you bring Terry on as well?
Sure, I'm doing it right now.
Terry, on mic, please. Unmute, I mean.
Be able to hear me?
Yes.
Yay. It's so amazing. I just wanted to know about the different ways of thinking about anti-Semitism and whether, Carola, you think that Appelfeld's views of anti-Semitism are actually match the ones that are Yaakov's reflections.
So I think you're suggesting, Terry, there might be a kind of disparity or gap between the presentation of the villagers' anti-Semitism and what Yaakov himself experiences.
And the your paper is focused on how there are these two lives that Yaakov has, that the trip is about the journey of the attempt to integrate.
Yeah.
If I understood you.
Yes.
Yeah. So on that journey, the understandings of anti-Semitism are a major part of what changes over time. Yaakov, has a variety of different understandings of anti-Semitism, and actually his re-understanding of his parents comes through understanding differently how anti-Semitism affected them too. So I'm just wondering how much of that is Appelfeld himself articulating a kind of variety of understandings of anti-Semitism that are his own, as opposed to ones he would distance himself from, as you said.
Well, I guess I would look to the text, and I'd have to look back at the text to see if there's some indication of the difference between what Appelfeld thinks and what Yaakov thinks. I mean, we'd have to actually be given some textual evidence of there being some difference between the narrator and Yaakov. I don't recall our being given that, but if I go back again, maybe I'll find some. I don't know. And I will go back again.
We are at about the end of an hour. I normally at this time thank the presenter, which I want to do in a fulsome way, because Carola has not only very thoughtfully presented this novel, and I'm writing immediately to the publishers to claim that we should get several copies that we should be able to claim for free, that we should be able to get all kinds of goodies probably popcorn and things like that for having promoted their novel so successfully. Carola, the Freighted Legacies program attempts to lead people to want to read and study these things, and you have done a masterful job. Shokin will be sending you lots of trinkets to thank you for promoting.
Thank,
I,
you're very
I'm
welcome.
curious.
Thank you.
Anybody who had not read the book will want to read it now, and uh, uh, I want to just mention that there's some more questions in the chat. People are welcome to look at that. I want to at this point just add a commercial. Freighted Legacies is part of the work of Friends of Jewish Renewal in Poland, which sponsors Beit Polska. We are reaching the end of the fiscal year. We would we need the financial support of people, and would appreciate people sending their support. And that information is available to make donations on our website, Jewish Renewal in Poland.org. I want to also mention that we continue with our program, which will be led by David Cater, who's been writing about his reflections and is inviting people who are children of survivors to do the same. And so he is going to be sharing some of his writing about his parents as a way of helping us to think about that. That'll be December 17th. I just want to mention two of the other programs. We actually have programs coming up all the way into October of next year. We have a program which will be reflecting on the work of Benjamin Balint, his recent book, Bruno Schulz, An Artist, a Murder, and the Hijacking of History. And we are involved in a major project of translating a book by my colleague Mark Rosenstein, Rabbi Mark Rosenstein, called Turning Points in Jewish History, which is the first anthology of modern Jewish history that is being produced for our Introduction to Judaism class, which is being used for people who are thinking of converting to Judaism. And we'll be reporting about that process of converting this, of translating this book. And we'll have the author along with a number of the Polish readers as that is being produced. So we look forward to that. We have a number of other very important books that are coming to the fore. We hope that people will continue to be interested in this Freighted Legacy program. We're blessed with the work of Dominika Zakraszewska, wonderful interpretation by Marzena Szymanska, who is alone today and has just received the text moments before it was delivered. A special thanks to Carola Kaplan for her presentation, and to all of you who joined in. What a wonderful thing to have you join in today. And we'll do this with this new technology. And if people are willing, there are a couple of questions that apparently did not get answered, and we're not in a rush. So we'll come back to that, but I wanted to, if you have a moment, Carola, to stay on. There's a question here from Elizabeth Doyle. She's not on that thing, so she can't come in.
on the screen.
But she says, or are the similarities reflective of the sad reality of such deep ambivalence on the part of Poles at that time? I guess she's rejoining a part of the question. We have a comment by Bud White, who has hung out with Andrea for a long time. It's disturbing that Appelfeld depicts such continuing anti-Semitism, but it's complicated. Our lives are not the same without the Jews, but also the Jews bring out the darkest parts of us. He's apparently quoting one of the characters in the novel. Yeah, very disturbing. Morgan Besser, who writes that he enjoyed the presentation and is going to read the book. And of course, he ends with a Schönen Dank, which means that he's hung out with some folks who speak Yiddish. I think we've responded to every question. Oh, Jerry Goldstein, Rabbi Jerry Goldstein, who tries to target me by saying I'm the child of Polish Jews, and do I identify with Yaakov in the novel? And of course I do. That's the short answer. And I think we've answered most of the questions, unless there's some thoughts that Carola has.
I would like to say a word. There is a part in the novel in which Yaakov reflects that Magda has a broader view and is able to really more than like, but really enter into, and did, this family, and that really broadened her life, and she has a larger outlook as a result of that. And he does talk about that. And so in some ways, I guess the book suggests that is a very important factor. The smaller your life, the more you've lived in one place and have not really had the experience of getting to know the other. And of course, that whole theme, by the way, the other, is one of the overarching themes in literature, as it is in life, and how difficult it is to accept the otherness of the other and not feel somehow threatened by it. And so in that sense, what we're seeing in the ambivalence or negativity of the villagers is a pervasive theme in literature altogether. It's not unique to the poems.
So from my perspective, as a child of survivors, and as someone who I think has a pretty good handle on Israelis who had nothing but disdain for survivors until relatively recently, Appelfeld's novel serves to remind people that there was a profound culture, and that there's some important lessons that they are important to come back to uncover. And I think that's what has attracted me to what the work in Poland is about, that we left behind a part of our Jewish past that we were afraid to look at because of the horrors of the destruction, and we didn't want to look behind the destruction to this rich culture that was just a symphony of richness. And quite frankly, we thought that Jewish nationalism would cover all the bases of meaning, and the other riches of the spiritual life of Polish Jewish world of novels, of communal expression that was part of Polish life, we ignored. Magda, in a sense, reintroduces Yaakov to many of these things. Anyway, much reflection. Again, thank you, Carola. Thank you all.
Thank
Warm
you all.
regards to everyone. And we will see you on December 17th with Dr. David Kadar.
Thank you. Thank you all.